Alright. Are we live? Let me just check. Share this. If it gets live, come on. Right, there it is. Just share this. Alright, people, alright. Just waiting for this to... Just sharing this, if I can type. Alright, almost there. Come on. Right, so I believe we are live. That's what I'm talking about. So, slightly push this up. I don't, hopefully that should be okay. Alright, people, alright. So, Inna alhamdulillahi wa kafah. والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى وعلى عباده الذين ارتضى ومن بهداهم اهتدى وبآثار أهل المدينة اقتفى وبعد فسلام الله على القوم أهلا وسهلا بكم ومرحبا people bienvenidos a todos mi gente, that's what I'm talking about, and swagatam. Right, so we've got Imam Zubair Yusuf Zai Saab in the house. Ahlan wa sahlan, Imam Saab. Ahlan wa sahlan. Harun Hid Al-Maliki, all the way from London, doing it. People, ahlan wa sahlan, ahlan wa sahlan. Oh, my glasses. I left them here, my props. I wound up so many people, I think, with that. People are like... I love it, I tell you, I love it. There's nothing quite like winding some of these people up. It makes my day. Not this, not my mini baseball torch. That's an awesome gadget though, you gotta say. Yeah. What? Right, so put that down. This thing. I'm not going to be wearing this today, but it's just in the background, so I thought whilst people are logging in, come on people, ahlan wa sahlan, click like, click share, get this out there. There's a very serious dars going down here, very serious dars, as you can see. Na'am, Shalom. Come on, click like. You know what was hilarious was somebody said I recommended Malm to a friend who's never watched him, and I said tune in, he's an academic. So the person says he tuned in for the first time and saw this, and he sent that back. Oh well, let me put down my awesome shades, prop shades, Maliki shades there in the background. Right, now, how are we doing, folks? How are we doing? Click like, click share. Do you have any advice for women seeking knowledge? I have some advice, inshallah. Let's go through. Need to punish some Muslims tomorrow. Whoa, punish some Muslim. Whoa, what's all this about? People, so it's been quite a week. Where's my... Right, un momento, people. I've taken some questions. I put some down. I'm just gonna, I think I've left the book over there. Just 1 second, 1 second. Yep, I'm back. I am back. Yep. So, that's awesome. Right, so how has this week been? What a week, people. What a week. I'm telling you. A lot's been happening. Lillahi alhamd. So, great things. Got to take some time off to go on a nice shopping spree. Nothing quite like consumerism, huh? So I went off, people. Had a quick flew off to Morocco. Bought some awesome books. Spent a few days there. Some of the bookshops, incredible. The one in Rabat is awesome. Dar al-Aman. If anybody's ever visiting Morocco, there's some 1-2 in Marrakesh, in Fez. I'll quickly, whilst people are tuning in, I'll show you guys some of the books I've kind of picked up, some interesting stuff. This is basic Maliki. Some of you have probably been through Ibn Ashir. I just picked it up, a small little thing. I've got many other copies of it, but this is an Usul al-Fiqh book on the Maliki madhab by Sheikh al-Faqih Muhammad Yahya al-Wulati. Something I've got anyway before, but I just thought as a small kind of book thing, that's interesting. Some research on the whole Mahdi, Jesus, kind of Dajjal thing. Interesting, kind of a critical review. I thought, well, that'll be interesting. Let me go through some of these. Although the author, Al-Hussein Boudoumeya, from my understanding, does incline towards a second coming, but he is quite critical on certain things. So that I liked that. I thought, he's more transparent than your average kind of guy who's not a trans. Let me show you an example, people. Here is a chart that the author has provided of all the hadith regarding the Mahdi. As you can see, this is to do with there coming a rightly guided Imam. All of these that he put there are the al-ahadith al-da'ifa wal-mawdu'a, are all the fabricated and weak hadith regarding the Mahdi. Even though this person isn't necessarily, I don't think he shares my opinion on this matter, but still, it's interesting that he was at least transparent to say, well, really the only hadith you're looking at are of that nature. But anyway, I thought it's interesting. I'll kind of go through that. I picked up some commentaries on, there's a commentary on Mukhtasar Khalil, known as Jawahir ad-Durar, في حل ألفاظ المختصر by a Sheikh Abu Abdullah Shamsuddin, great Maliki scholar, At-Tata'i al-Maliki, who passes away in 942 Hijri, which equates to about 1535. So that's something I picked up. This is actually in 7, I believe, volumes. It's come into print recently. I believe last year it's been brought back into print. It's an awesome commentary on Mukhtasar Khalil. So that's the whole 7 kind of volumes of it. So, all right. So, here's another interesting commentary on the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. This one is done by the Sheikh Abu Muhammad al-Jazuli, the famous al-Jazuli, sometimes very popular. I mean, there are a few Jazulis, but he is very popular. So this commentary has just been brought into print, I believe, just last year, at the earliest, really. So it's something which, as soon as this is a new kind of print of it. Although I think there was some copies of it around a few years back, but they've kind of reprinted the whole thing. And I thought, well, I saw that. I thought that looks a bit interesting. That was in 4 volumes. So I thought definitely get my hands on that. This is an interesting book. It's basically a kind of comparison between the Hanafi student, Abu Hanifa student, Imam Muhammad, and his transmission of the Muwatta, and how it's had an impact. And there's a follow-up. So there's like an evaluation of his transmission with other transmissions, and also how because his Muwatta kind of varies a bit. It lacks about 700 hadith almost. But how his transmission went on to influence certain usuli positions. But I thought that's interesting. This is once again Maliki fiqh. Those of you who have heard of the Qurtubiyya, which is a poem by al-Faqih Yahya al-Qurtubi, this is a brief kind of commentary on it. A commentary is a stretch really, just an explanation of certain words. But I thought, interessante. Some hadithi stuff, I thought, well, why not? There's the ilal. Alright, people, the ilal, you know, the hidden faults in hadith. So this is by Ibn Abi Hatim al-Razi, who's asking this in 2 volumes, Kitab al-Ilal, where he's asking his father and Abu Zur'a al-Razi, 2 major scholars of hadith, on certain hadith that are problematic and things like that. And right, people, those of you who are into Maliki fiqh, alright, this is what I'm talking about. There's a book, this has been recently brought into print. It's Qalshani, Abu al-Abbas al-Qalshani, the Maghribi scholar who passes away in the 9th century Hijri. His commentary on the Risala. So I managed to get hold of this. This is it's on the Risala you're looking at it, people, you're looking at it. That's what I'm talking about. All those volumes right there. So that's, I believe, 8 volumes. Right, so some interesting stuff. Just put those down over there. Right, so as you can see, I've been busy with certain things. This is a book in strange hadith and the kind of problematization of them. So I thought, well, that'll be interesting, especially with a lot of the research I've got going on nowadays. And this is an old book by al-Khatib al-Baghdadi on how riwayah is done. So these are all interesting and they tie into a lot of the research I've got going on. But some interesting things are worth sharing. Let me share some gems that I've been taking a look at some of these books. This is another book of Abu Hatim al-Razi. He's a great muhaddith scholar and hidden kind of defects of hadith. So let me, you see, here's a hadith. I'll share a gem with you. There's a hadith that Ibn Khuzaima has in his Sahih. And it's also transmitted by Abu Dawood from somebody called Kharija ibn Mus'ab, who transmits, and the chain goes on to Ubay ibn Ka'ab, that the Prophet said, Inna lil wudu'i shaytanan, that the wudu has a specific shaitan dedicated to it. And his name is Walhan. Fattaqu waswas al-ma. So be careful of this OCD kind of behavior with of waswas, these whispers. Now many people may have heard of this hadith. Okay. Now this hadith about there being a devil for wudu and his name is Walhan, they are all transmitted pretty much through this person, Kharijat ibn Mus'ab. And he is heavily criticized. So in this, the Ilal of Abu Hatim al-Razi, he speaks about this and he says that لا يصح في هذا الباب عن النبي الشيء وخارج ليس بالقوي عند أصحابنا وضعفه ابن المبارك. So there's nothing authentic in this entire chapter from the Prophet. So if you hear of a hadith saying that there's a devil to do with waswasa when you're doing wudu, beware of it. There's no such established hadith like that. This is the other book of Ilal, hidden kind of defects in hadith, by the great muhaddith once again, Ibn Abi Hatim, the son of Abu Hatim, who's asking his father, Abu Hatim and Abu Zur'a. What's interesting here is, I thought I'd share a hadith. I was just taking a look. You've probably all, many of you may have come across this hadith. Now it's interesting that there's a hadith that Abu Zur'a highlights that Ma'mar transmits from Zuhri from Anas. That when the Prophet, so this is a hadith Zuhri is transmitting from Anas, that when the Messenger of Allah passed away, irtaddat al-Arab, the Arabs they became apostates, they abandoned the deen of Islam. فقال أبو بكر إنما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, Abu Bakr said, أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يقولوا لا إله إلا الله. That Abu Bakr said, I heard the Messenger of Allah say that I have been commanded to fight people until they declare La ilaha illallah. What's interesting is this is Zuhri transmitting this from Anas. Abu Zur'a then highlights that هذا خطأ. He says هذا خطأ إنما هو الزهري عن عبيد الله ibn Abdullah ibn Utbah. That Zuhri is actually transmitting this hadith from Ubaidullah ibn Abdullah ibn Utbah from Abu Huraira, and who is then saying it's from the Prophet. This is not from Anas, and that is a mistake, and this is that people have transmitted, or whether Zuhri has done this or people have claimed to have done this from Zuhri. It is not true. This is not from Anas. So it's interesting how these hidden defects, and there you've got a sound chain from Zuhri going to Anas, and Abu Zur'a is saying actually that's wrong. This hadith is not even from Anas. This hadith is actually from Abu Huraira, and Ubaidullah is transmitting it from him, and Zuhri is taking it from him. So it's interesting. I thought I'd highlight some of these points, some of these gems that I'd kind of come across. Here's another interesting thing. This is a book I picked up about Ibn Kathir evaluating and criticizing other Mufassirin that went before him. Those of you that have just tuned in, if you click like, if you click share this link, get it out there. So I was just going through some of the verses that Ibn Kathir kind of criticizes about other people, and there was an interesting verse. I thought, well, let's it's an interesting kind of methodology, really, that you see. There's a verse in the Quran in Surah Ma'idah that Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la taqtulu as-sayda wa antum hurum. Do not go hunting whilst you're in a state of ihram. Allah is addressing people. وَمَنْ قَتَلَهُ, whoever does however hunt and kills an animal. وَمَنْ قَتَلَهُ مِنْكُمْ مُتَعَمِّدًا, intentionally, فَجَزَاؤُهُ مِثْلَ مَا قَتَلَ مِنَ النَّعَمِ يحكم به ذوى عدل, and so on. So whosoever does do that, فَمَنْ قَتَلَهُ مِنْكُمْ مُتَعَمِّدًا فَجَزَاءٌ, then a person has to give a similar kind of animal as a sacrifice, مثل ما قتل من النعم. What's interesting is Allah uses the word متعمدا. Whosoever kills whosoever hunts intentionally. So Tawus, who's the great Yemeni kind of mujtahid of his time and the student of Ibn Abbas, he says that this does not apply to anybody who ends up hunting by accident. As in, if you, let's say you were shooting an arrow and you happen to just kill a prey, as opposed to intentionally. Because Allah says, وَمَنْ قَتَلَهُ مِنْكُمْ مُتَعَمِّدًا, whosoever did that مُتَعَمِّدًا, intentionally. Now the interesting thing is that Ibn Kathir and most of the scholars reject Tawus's reading of the Quran here, of this verse, and they say it doesn't make a difference whether a person was forgetful or intentional or whatever. If he kills an animal, he will have to give a sacrifice. And Ibn Kathir is also criticizing Tawus, the famous Tabi'i, for that view here. It's interesting, you see, because that's, in my understanding, Tawus is spot on, because that is the reading of the Quran. That is Allah's actual words. Allah is saying, whosoever does this intentionally. And even though this mas'ala may not be so much of a big deal today with hunting, but it's interesting how people read into the Quran, then superimpose their understanding on everybody else. That's an interesting thing, really, too. So I'll share 1-2 gems that I've come across. I've only purchased these books in this last week, really, and this week gone. So, and just got back yesterday. So, but there were some things I was taking a look at. They're worth sharing. This is the Jawahir that I was speaking about by al-Tata'i, Abu Abdullah al-Tata'i on the Mukhtasar of Khalil. There's an interesting mas'ala in here, which is in the Mukhtasar of Khalil. Look at that, people. Inspiration from lefties, huh? Life is a great big canvas. Throw all the paint you can at it. Allah, Allah. That was by a left-handed person. That's from my desktop, you know, my calendars left. Right, so it's an interesting mas'ala here about human beings. If they pass away, do they become impure? And وَآدَمِيًا, that they remain pure according to Ibn al-Qasim, Ibn Sha'ban, Ibn Abd al-Hakam, and that is their understanding, Ibn Abd al-Salam, and this is what the Mudawwana reads according to the Maliki madhab, although some Malikis like Sahnun and others said that a person, if he dies, he becomes impure, but that's not the general understanding. And Ibn Rushd also goes on to say that a person remains pure. And Khalil, and that was what Qadi Iyad goes with, and many of the Iraqi Malikis. But what's interesting is Khalil highlights how there's no distinction between a Muslim. He kind of alludes to no distinction between a Muslim and a Kafir. I thought I'd just share that Kuffar or Muslim, we are pure as human beings. And that is obviously from the Mukhtasar of Khalil according to the School of Medina. So it's interesting. I mean, these were some of the... I thought I'd just, whilst people were tuning in, go over some of these. Ahlan wa sahlan, those of you just tuning in. If you click like, share, get this out there, people. This is another copy of the Muwafaqat, a book on the objectives of the Sharia by the legend and Don, the Maliki Don from Muslim Spain, Imam al-Shatibi. His Muwafaqat, okay, the first real major book on the objectives of the Sharia, which was authored about 700 years ago. So I picked up a nicer kind of print. I have to say, I do like these creamy, yellowy kind of pages. They're soft. They're softer on the eyes. But here's something I thought is worth sharing. And he obviously is the Maliki Don. And it's interesting, he's discussing here, there's a section where he's discussing about if the Quran has an apparent clash with a Sunnah, with a Hadith, and what should our approach be. But it's interesting that he then highlights, he says that وَأَمَّا إِن لَمْ يَسْتَنِدِ الْخَبَرِ إِلَى قَاعِدَةٍ قَطْعِيَّةٍ. If this hadith does not fall back on a clearly established principle, a qat'i, a conclusively established principle of Islam, and then if it doesn't and it clashes with the Quran, فَلَا بُدَّ مِن تَقْدِيمِ الْقُرْآنِ عَلَى الْخَبْرِ بِإِطْلَاقٍ. There is no question that we give preference to the Quran. It's interesting. Right, so that's interesting how he speaks. But what's more interesting, Allah, you thought I was going to stop there. You underestimate me. People have asked, what about Mutawatir Hadith? Look at what Imam Shatibi says. He says, وَأَيْضًا فَإِنَّمَا ذُكِرَ مِن تَوَاتُرِ الْأَخْبَارِ إِنَّمَا غَالِبُهُ فَرْض أَمْرٌ جَائِزٌ. That he says that this is as to what has been mentioned about tawatur al-akhbar, having a hadith which are mutawatira. فَإِنَّمَا غَالِبُهُ, the majority of all of this discussion is fardu amrin jaiz. It is simply hypothesizing a matter that may be possible. They're just playing with plausibilities. وَلَعَلَّكَ لَا تَجِدُ فِي الْأَخْبَارِ النَّبَوِيَّةِ مَا يُقْضَى بِتَوَاتُرِهِ إِلَى زَمَانِ الْوَاقِعَةِ. He says, and you will hardly ever find anything that could be called mutawatir from the ahadith of the Prophet till his age, which is 800 years after the Prophet. He's saying, فَالْبَحْثُ الْمَذْكُورُ فِي الْمَسْأَلَةِ بَحْثٌ فِي غَيْرِ وَاقِعٍ. Says the discussion in this is a discussion in something that hasn't actually happened, but it's a hypothetical. أو في نادر الوقوع, or if they're claiming it happened but it was so rare. And he says ولا كبير جدوى فيه والله أعلم. He says, and there is no real benefit in this discussion. Wallahu a'lam. Dons, people, dons of the school of Medina. Right, so that's all of that. I did pick up, for the Hanafis out there, I picked up a copy of Usul al-Sarakhsi, Abu Bakr al-Sarakhsi. I thought, can't leave out the Hanafis now. What's interesting is I wanted this discussion, but it seems to be missing in all the copies. I was looking online as well, where he's speaking about the ruwat of the muhaddith, of the Sahaba who you accept unquestionably. So he mentions you accept people like, he's going to say Zayd ibn Thabit, the Khulafa al-Rashidun, al-Abadila, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, all these people. But then he says, وَأَمَّا الْمَعْرُوفِ بِالْعَدَالَةِ وَالضَّبْطِ وَالْحِفْظِ. As to those companions who are known for memorizing and stuff like this, كأبي هريرة وأنس بن مالك عن رضي الله عنهما وغيرهما ممن اشتهر بالصحبة. And then all of a sudden the discussion seems to change. I mean, that's what it, unless people are claiming this discussion, because all of a sudden he's then talking about puberty and stuff like this, and something I'm missing in these texts. But it's interesting because the Hanafis are some of the early scholars who were very critical of a lot of the ahadith that were being transmitted in the name of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. So I thought I'd get that, but it seems to be still missing. There seems to be a page that somebody has ripped out in that. But anyway, I thought I'd share that with you guys, some of the things I've been up to. How's it all going, man? Let me just check. I'm just trying to... right. God damn. There you go. That's done. Alright. Just trying to block. Anybody trolling is going to get blocked, people. Is going to get blocked. So I can see I've really annoyed a hell of a lot of people, huh? Let's talk meat. I'm awake. Elizabeth Donague is saying, I'm awake. Let's talk meat. Alright. It's all about the carnivores. The fangs, people, the fangs. He didn't have a job. I've got no idea what you're talking about. What's the ruling on TV? TV is fine. I mean, just don't try to eat it. I don't know what else anybody could say. Right, so it seems I've upset a few people, as always. Do you know? Right, so guys, there's I think it's worth highlighting. Naturally, every week I'm upsetting some people, but that's just standard. I mean, would I, if a week passed by and I wasn't upsetting people, I mean, is that even me? Am I even myself? Am I possessed? Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Somebody's asked a question. Feroz has asked a question. Do you believe in Dajjal? You know, this is an interesting question, because this question is built upon a presupposed belief. Okay, it's interesting because it's built upon a presupposition. Okay, because you are asking about something already having a belief construct. Whereas if I gave you a word of something that you've never heard of, let's say, or if I just gave you a term, let's say you have heard of it, but it's something like if I say, do you believe in the embezzler? Somebody who embezzles. Or do you believe in the, like, what are we talking about? Or do you believe in, so, you see, when you say Dajjal, you're not starting from ground zero. You're starting with beliefs that you already carry. I've told people before, Dajjal as the Antichrist is a myth. It does not exist in Islam. The word Dajjal does come in several hadith. They all, the hadith that it comes in, you've got, now how do you look at these hadith? I've told you before, this ties into the topic of Jesus, his second coming, the Mahdi, and this Antichrist, if that's what you want the term to mean at Dajjal, because Dajjal means deceiver. It could be referring generally, because in some hadith it comes on its own. My approach to this is any of these hadith that are linked to each other are all unacceptable. And that is clear. So there is no Antichrist that is coming, that is got this kind of devil child that is going to come and try people. And that is absurd, that God would test people like that. Because that, you see, that is to call God an unreasonable God. And a kind of sadist, a sadistic kind of the God of the Old Testament, kind of this sadistic. So basically, Allah never gives you proof to believe in Him, but He tells you to just believe in Him based on reason and perception and look around. But then He sends a devil child, which has immense powers of defying the laws of nature and bringing the dead back to life and basically giving you proof. So God tells you, go look in the earth and look for proof about me. And then He sends a devil child who will show you proof. And then if you follow that proof, you get done. That has to be the most absurd. That has to be the most absurd suggestion. That Allah is going to say to you, look, follow me based on proof. That's like I say to you, right, okay, right, somebody's going to come to you and they're going to tell you that they're from me. And if they tell you to go with them, go with them. And then somebody comes and they take you, and then I say, but why did you go? You were supposed to know that that was a test. So this is absurd, right? You're supposed to believe based on your evidences. Then God sends a devil child who has all these evidences. And then, but if you follow the perception, what you're actually seeing is believing. Ver para creer en español. You know, seeing is believing. So you see this, you believe it, and now you get punished for doing that. That kind of a God is just a sadistic God who's just toying with people, just trying to torture them. It completely clashes with the concept of Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. So no, I don't believe in these kind of things. You want to believe in them, you can believe in them. It doesn't bother me. People out there believe in the spaghetti monster and the bogeyman, and it doesn't bother me what people believe. But no, to me, Allah is not this kind of sadistic God who kind of toys with people and tricks them and tries to trip them up and stuff like this. Right, so that's not... right, okay, somebody's posted a link. I'll comment on that in a moment. So, and anybody who's trolling, spamming, you're going to get blocked. Right, so that's as far as... So the Dajjal, if you start from ground zero, where you don't have a preconceived idea of the Antichrist, you will then look at these hadith and say, well, okay, anything that's linked with Jesus and this, and they're problematic, and I'll show that in the future when I do my course on the second coming of Jesus being false. But the Dajjal hadith are either referring to the shaitan in some narrations where the Prophet has mentioned the term Dajjal, the imposter, the deceiver, who is the devil, is the deceiver. Or maybe, because I find that hadith interesting, that a time will come that every prophet warned his ummah about this time where deception, the deceptive, will be so powerful. What is this deceptive? And that's just my take. I think maybe it's to do with that we are embarking on an age where the virtual is becoming imperceptible from the real, and it's becoming more real than the real. That's just my take. I don't say you have to take that. You can just chuck all of these hadith out, or you can just consider those to do with the devil, full stop. It's as simple as that. Right now, I request you to study Maulana Maududi for good guidance. Yeah, sure, inshallah. If it's relevant, I'll listen to anybody. Right now, I'm getting a lot of these questions. I don't know if Facebook has updated something, but I don't seem to. Is it possible to prove through empirical evidence that Allah exists? No, it's not possible. We can't prove that Allah exists. Not prove meaning empirically prove. Prove can mean, like you could say, the term prove or proof has a general understanding, and I suppose you can loosely use the term, like, oh, I've proven this to you, by just debating it with you. I've proven. I don't mean in that kind of proof. I suppose you can rationally, I do believe that it's rational to believe in a creator. That's my understanding. I don't think it's an irrational belief or an unreasonable belief to hold at all. Now, as to can you empirically prove that there is a God? No, you cannot. Then it would be useless to have faith. And hence, these miracles don't work the way people want them to work, because then there would be no test of faith. It would just be empirical data. So people, we're hooked up on miracles. We have this kind of obsession about miracles, and Jesus is going to come, this is a miracle, or this is going to happen, it's a miracle, and everybody just wants supernatural events to happen, but they don't happen. And this is why they keep getting ridiculed by non-Muslims and atheists. So my suggestion is to strip this folklore and superstition away from Islam, go to the pure understanding of Islam, and keep that. As to things mentioned in the Quran, stories in the Quran, you have to remember, when Allah mentioned in the Quran about stories, there was an objective why He mentioned them. The objective was that you take a kind of a lesson from them. It was not about the kind of miracle per se. Now, Allah was not trying to teach biology when He was teaching a story. He was not trying to teach physics. He wasn't trying to teach geography. So you don't make your lessons out of those stories. You take what Allah has said and you keep it to what He has said. You can speculate, that's up to you, but what He hasn't said, don't add. You can say, this is my interpretation. I'm inferring this from what Allah has said. But don't say Allah has said that. That's different. So Allah, when He speaks of certain events that were miraculous, that appear miraculous, the purpose was, Allah was not mentioning much detail. He was just mentioning something. So let's give an example of, people have asked me the stick of Moses, Musa alayhi salam. And they've said that why, this, when he threw it, it became a snake. That's one way to read the Quran. But when you look at, you see, this throwing the stick occurs in 3 places in the Quran. Okay. Now, in one, it says, فَإِذَا هُوَ ثُعْبَانٌ مُبِينٌ. It's a snake. But in the other, it mentions the same incident. فَهِيَ تَهْتَزُّ كَالْجَانِ. It is shaking as though it is a snake. So it's interesting now, in one verse, Allah says it as a snake. In one, He says it was shaking as though, this was Musa's stick, as though it was a snake. Now, how you take this is up to you. Do you believe that Musa's stick, alayhi salam, became an actual snake? Many Muslims may believe that. One verse of the Quran clearly doesn't say that. It states that it was as though it was like a snake. Now, in my understanding, that it was not a snake. Okay, when he threw the thing, it was not a snake. But it was described as though it was a snake. And what was the purpose behind this? Because let's look at the objective of the Quran. Let me explain the whole story. You see, in the time of Fir'aun, magic was at its... Somebody's just laughing his head off. If you don't mind at least allowing me to finish what I have to say, you know, before you just continuously non-stop laugh your head off, right? So, in the time of Moses, magic was the thing. Okay, it was the thing. That these people, it was seen as the elite, that these people had these special powers through the gods. Now, I want you to understand something. How were the magicians pulling off their magic? Because Allah uses a similar kind of verse to describe their sticks. That وَسَحَرُوا أَعْيُنَ النَّاسِ, that when they threw the sticks, يُخَيَّلُ إِلَيْهِمْ, it would appear to people as though they were snakes. How was that happening? You know, if I throw a stick, it doesn't appear like that. So how was this happening? Now, many of the Mufassirin have written that they were using certain kind of compounds and chemicals. And many of the Mufassirin write that they were using things like quicksilver, like which in Arabic they call zibaq, like mercury. Now, these kind of things were reacting to heat. So hence in the Quran, when they say to Musa that we will have a magic showdown, they specify the time. And Allah quotes that in the Quran. They say, وَمَوْعِدُكُمْ ضُحَى, that you have to meet us that when it's early, just after sunrise. When it's early morning. So the sun is shining down. Now, was this just coincidental that they mentioned that time? Many of the Mufassirin say no, it was, in fact you can read up the Tafasir. They say it's because they needed that light to make the mercury react, the zibaq, which was in their sticks. So they would fill their sticks with certain things, and when they would throw it, how they exactly did this, I don't know, but this is what a lot of Mufassirin do write, that the chemical, the compound they had within there was reacting with the light. And that's why Allah mentions the light of day being important for them. Now, you see, when they threw their sticks, people get, because Allah says, وَاسْتَرْهَبُوا النَّاسِ, that people, وَسَحَرُوا أَعْيُنَ النَّاسِ وَاسْتَرْهَبُوهُم, people became frightened. That people had fear, that whoa, they were terrified, that these are actual snakes. They thought they were actual snakes. Everybody accepts that their sticks were not snakes. We accept this, that the magicians, their sticks weren't snakes. Allah Himself says it. But the people, وَاسْتَرْهَبُوهُم, they were petrified, Allah mentions. وَاسْتَرْهَبُوهُم, from rahab, from to be terrified, because they thought they were snakes. Now, Musa alayhi salam is taught by Allah how they have done this. He is divinely taught. Now the thing is, the magicians didn't know, like outside their circle, nobody knew how they used to do that. People believed they were actual snakes, that they could turn them with the power of the gods, of the Pharaoh gods. But Musa alayhi salam is inspired and taught by Allah how these people are doing this trick. Now, Allah mentions that he is then told to throw his stick. Does he come across this compound, this chemical, does he come across this? Allahu A'lam, I would believe that he does. Allah teaches him these things. Hence, he throws it and he is petrified. But then Allah says in the same verse, get your hand, you see his hand which would have made contact with this, touch, place it, وَضْمُمْهُ إِلَى جَنَاحِكَ, that place your hand where under your, either under your armpit or at your side where there's warmth, and then remove it. And it mentions that his hand lights up. And if you read what the Mufassirin say, they say it would tashi'u minhu ashi'a, that rays were coming out of it. And then Allah mentions min ghayri su', without there being any harm. Now, in this understanding, you see, there's the great Sufi scholar Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. Now he says a similar thing. He says that when Musa alayhi salam met the magicians and they threw their sticks, and then Musa threw his stick, and it appears either as a snake, or according to some people it becomes a snake. But Allah says that when he threw this, that فَإِذَا هِيَ تَلْقَفُ مَا يَأْفِكُونَ. تَلْقَفُ, it consumes. It consumes. Now it's interesting how you read. Allah doesn't say ta'kul, eat. Allah says talqafu, ma ya'fikun. Now it's interesting how you read this, because this can be read in two ways according to the Arabic language. Either it ate their sticks, that's one understanding, it ate their sticks, or the other understanding, it ate their lie. It exposed their lie. Now, Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, he highlights as well that if Musa alayhi salam threw his stick and his snake, just outperformed their snakes, then there would be no purpose to this. Because all that would prove to the people is that his magic is more powerful than their magic. So it reinforces a superstition. So all it takes now is another person to come and outperform Musa's magic. You see, because if what we're doing is, look, those people have brought falsehood. Which is more deserving of a prophet? To outperform them or to expose it as falsehood? So what Muhyiddin ibn Arabi highlights is that when he threw his stick exposed how they were doing the trick. So people, فَإِذَا هِيَ تَلْقَفُ مَا يَأْفِكُونَ, it consumed their trickery, their falsehood. And people realized that they don't have no power from the gods. That was just trickery. They were just bewitching us. They don't have any true power of the gods. Now you tell me which one of those two narratives befits the story. Is it one that Musa alayhi salam comes and outperforms them in magic? So he does a greater trick than them. This is to the eyes of the spectators. So they did a trick. Remember, the spectators think their snakes are real. Allah mentions that. They're petrified. They're terrified. They see the snakes and they think, whoa. Now Musa alayhi salam comes and performs a greater snake trick than them. This is to the eyes of the spectators. So they say, this is narrative one. They say, oh, we're going to go with him because his trick is better. That doesn't sound like a divine thing to do. That doesn't sound like, that just reinforces the narrative of wherever you see magic, just go with the stronger magic. Now, no, I'm not saying Musa alayhi salam claimed to do magic, but in the eyes of the spectators, because they're doing this for the spectators. Remember that they say we're going to gather people and do this as a show, as a display. So to the people, Allah mentions, the people see the magicians as real. And they see now Musa's thing as real. So if Musa, according to the spectator who's not a believer, he sees lots of snakes, whoa, a more powerful snake, whoa, okay, I'm going to go with that one because it's stronger. That doesn't reinforce Tawheed. That just simply shows, well, it seems to encourage a superstitious culture. Like, okay, just go with whoever's magic is better. So if after Musa alayhi salam dies, another person comes, does even better magic, just go with them. Or is it more befitting that Musa alayhi salam exposed their magic and showed the people that these are just liars? They have no connections with the gods that they speak of, that their gods do not help them. It is a lie. That to me sits more right with my understanding. Now you can take the other understanding. You can say, no, I want to believe that Musa alayhi salam in the eyes of the spectators did a greater magic, which we believe that was real though, and the first one wasn't real. But to the spectators it was all magic. Now they just followed him because his magical event was more powerful than the other magical event. So this seems to follow a doctrine of might is right. You know, a very kind of the argument of a very kind of but I mean a philosophical argument that is well known about might is right, especially argued by people like Thrasymachus and stuff like this from way before. Now from the time of Socrates, that might is always right. You always go with might. Now I mean you can take that approach, and many Muslims do. I see that as naive personally, but I mean they can take that. Alhamdulillah. I mean I don't say people have to believe what I'm saying. To me that's just a superficial reading of the Quran, because to me that just reinforces the other message. It just shows your one was just stronger, so we should just go with you. But if tomorrow, if after you die somebody else comes and does something stronger, we should just go with them. So, and this is what Imam Malik said. You see, this is the interesting thing. Not that he said this about the magic stick, but he said that when he was debating somebody and they said, look, let's have a debate, and he said, well, why? And they said, well, if you beat me, I'll follow you. If I beat you, you follow me. And he said, well, what if tomorrow somebody else comes and beats us both? We then follow him. I mean, truth ought to have consistency to it. So that's my reading of this. But I mean, just to explain. So when people ask about things like, look, Isa alayhi salam, his birth, I have highlighted that, look, when it comes to nobody, listen, in the Quran, the apparent reading, we have to understand that there's many readings in the Quran, many things in the Quran that nobody seems to take literally. Okay, sorry, most Muslims, there's some things which nobody takes literally, like let's say when Allah says he placed his hand over their hands. Nobody takes that literally. Then there's majority of the Muslims do not take the where Allah is describing body parts for himself to be literal. Nobody takes, I mean, from the majority of the Muslims, which is the Ash'aris and the Maturidis and so on, don't take that literally. They say, no, this is just idiomatic usage and so on. And then I ask you, when it comes to the birth of Jesus, peace and blessings be upon him, nobody takes the exact reading of the Quran literally. So it's interesting, because the exact reading reads that وَمَرْيَمْ الَّتِي أَحْسَنَتْ فَرْجَهَا فَنَفَخْنَا فِيهِ, that Maryam who preserved her private parts, and we blew into her private parts, that God blew into the private parts of Maryam alayhi salam. Nobody takes that literally. So I mean, and then the other verse that speaks about her birth, about this birth of Jesus alayhi salam, speaks about an angel coming in the form of a man, and then he blew into her. And then many of the Mufassirin say he blew in from her blouse, or he blew in from her private parts. They write things like this. And so, no, and it says, فَتَمَثَّلَ لَهَا بَشَرًا سَوِيًّا, came as a full-fledged man. and then appears to her and says, لِأَهَبَ, so I can grant you a child. This is the reading of the Quran. Nobody takes this literally. So don't throw this at me trying to say, oh, well, you know, nobody's taking these things literally. If you did, Allah doesn't go too much into detail about this. All we know is Allah mentions certain things. He mentions, now Allah never refers to, by the way, Allah never refers to Mary, Maryam, as the Virgin Mary. In Islam, we never refer to her as the Virgin Mary. This is a Christian thing, right? In the Quran, it never mentions her as Virgin Mary, right? So I'm just saying that there's many things we have inherited from Christianity. Now, the birth of Jesus alayhi salam, even when, it's interesting, even when when some of the people are asking the Prophet about, they're trying to debate with the Prophet, Allah responds in a riddle. He doesn't respond clearly. He doesn't say, he says the similitude of him is like that of Adam. Leaves it. Now, people can infer from that what they like. But Allah hasn't said, Allah could have just very clearly said, yes, it's like this. But He doesn't. He says the similitude is like Adam. Now you could say, yes, but Adam never had a dad. But then, did Adam have a mum? So, and you could say, yeah, but that's not what it's talking about. But how do you know? Because Allah just responded in a riddle. He didn't respond with the exact verbatim thing. So the general understanding that Muslims have is that, okay, there was some miracle. Isa alayhi salam is born. The general understanding is that, okay, this is without a father. Now, from a scientific perspective, you would look at things like parthenogenesis, where a species does self-reproduce, and this does happen in several species, in certain lizards, in certain things. Up until just a few decades ago, we didn't even know that it ever occurred in birds, and it does happen, parthenogenesis, and that's a perspective that somebody could take. The main thing is that it's not something that was such a big deal. The interesting thing is that, look, whether Jesus was born of a father or wasn't born of a father makes no difference to Jesus' message, according to Muslims. It doesn't. The general reading of the Quran does imply that he was born without a father. That's the general reading, implies that. Although it doesn't say very clearly, explicitly, it implies that. Now, it makes no difference in Islam to this miracle, let's say, impacting his message in any way, contrary to what Muslims are making of it today. And what's interesting is Christians themselves, the early Christians, didn't believe that Jesus was born miraculously. That's interesting. It was only 200-300 years after Jesus that this became official doctrine. So St. Paul, the Pauline church, and all these people did not claim, Matthew in his gospel does not claim that Jesus had some miraculous birth. And what's interesting is the Jews never accused Mary of adultery. Not in her time, not in Jesus's time they didn't, that I'm aware of. And neither do the Christian sources mention this. The Gospels don't mention that she was ever accused. If she was accused, they would have killed her. There's no two ways about that. Mary was such a weak character in front of the Jewish council. They would have killed her. They killed Jesus, or allegedly they tried to kill Jesus, and he was a man. A woman, if they wanted to kill a woman, it was nothing in that day and age, in that kind of a patriarchal society. So it's interesting. So I would say that, look, where Allah hasn't addressed things, we leave them. We just focus on the message. Right, so yes, now that is true. Somebody has mentioned, she says, وَلَمْ يَمْسَسْنِي بَشَرٍ, but then that's, you see, there's 3 women in the Quran who are mentioned like this, that they're given glad tidings. Now the wording is a bit different, but Ibrahim alayhi salam's wife is given the similar glad tiding, that when she's at such an old age and she says, how can I have a child when I'm at this old age, but she still goes on to have a child. Zakaria, right, so his wife goes on to same thing. He says that, well, how can we have a child when my wife is barren? And the same thing the angel says, well, Allah, if he wants to do something, he says be, and it is. And she goes on to have a child. I'm not saying the apparent reading of the Quran doesn't negate. The apparent reading of the Quran does imply that Jesus was born miraculously, not explicitly, but it does imply that. So I'll go with that. I have no objection in going with that. But I'm just saying, where Allah has stopped, we should stop. Don't overly assert things. Allah hasn't said things like that in the Quran. Now you are just asserting them because of your own background, because of your own thinking. Allah does say, if you want to assert everything, Allah says that we blew into her private parts. Assert that. You're not going to assert that, are you? So you're going to say, well, that's a metaphor. Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, my point is that you see this whole story, this description of events to do with Mary. It's mentioned certain details here, there. We can take it, we can, alhamdulillah, take the lesson from it that Allah is teaching you. He wasn't trying to teach you, Allah wasn't trying to teach you biology. He wasn't trying to teach you historical facts, as in, all right, people, document this. He was just trying to give a message of encouragement of how people have suffered previously and how this message has gone through different tribes and different people. Right, so I did say, look, parthenogenesis is one explanation. I'm not saying, look, I'm just giving an explanation. To start off with, I have highlighted that we, when it comes to Jesus and Mary, are more influenced by Christianity than we think. That's what I would say. Our understanding of Mary is never referred to in Islam as the Virgin Mary, yet many Muslims think of her as the Virgin Mary. So it's interesting, we have a lot of things in Islam that are taken from Christianity that have crept in. But the general understanding, look, I'm going with the general understanding, just in case people try to say, oh, Mufti Abu Layth isn't going with this. I am going with the general understanding. I am saying that the overall reading implies, it does imply that there was a miraculous kind of birth. It doesn't, I don't feel it explicitly states it like that. I think it, in my understanding, it implies it strongly. So that's the difference. But I don't think this is that important. To me, this isn't that important. This is like whether if you're gonna tell me, what was Nuh alayhi salam's father's name? I don't know. It makes no it has no difference, no bearing on his message. What was such and such father's name? We don't know. It doesn't really make a difference. In my understanding, it doesn't make a difference. So moving on, I don't want to focus too much on the whole Jesus, alayhi salam thing. I do think we are heavily influenced by Christian kind of thinking. Right, so what have we got, people? What have we got? Let's take a few of the questions. Let's take some of the... Right, okay, guys, I think I need to clear up. There's been a clip, an audio clip going around. Right, somebody's asked about mid-Sha'ban, the 15th of Sha'ban. Is that an innovation? The 15th of Sha'ban is based on weak hadith. It is not an established event in Islam, according to the Quran and Sunnah. If people want to practice it, that's up to them. Imam Malik didn't like these kind of things. He didn't like innovations, and that's my own understanding as well. Right, so I don't lean towards innovations. I believe innovations, in my understanding, I believe them to be inaccurate, incorrect, and wrong. But if people believed in them and wanted to do them, I wouldn't condemn those people. That's my approach. So if people want to celebrate all these kind of ceremonies and make things up and do this kind of stuff, this is like, to me, this is like folklore religion. I get that, so I'm just going to leave them to it. It's not actually authentic Islam, but it doesn't really make a difference as long as it helps those people. Alhamdulillah. To me, it's not a big deal. I wouldn't condemn somebody if they were saying, I want to believe in good bid'ah, I want to believe in celebrating Mawlid, I want to believe in khatams, and I want to do these things, I want to go to shrines, and I want to do all this stuff. To me, all this stuff is superstition, it's folklore, it's not really authentic Islam in any way. But if it helps people and they want to do it, I'm not going to condemn them, although I'm critical of this concept. I don't agree with it, and I consider the concept to be highly flawed. And Imam Malik was actually very harsh against it, because Imam Malik's words were, whosoever innovates in Islam and claims it's a bid'ah has actually betrayed the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Imam Malik was actually very harsh. Although I wouldn't be that harsh to people, because today it's too widespread. So if you're going to be that harsh, people are going to only react. So I'll just leave people to it. Right, okay, so there's this audio clip, voice note going around. Let's lighten up the mood, people. Let's lighten up the mood. Are you encouraging men to dress like... I can't even see the rest of what you're saying. Muhammad Sadiq, get a life. People need a life, seriously. I wonder what it's like. I mean, actually, I'd be terrified to wonder what it's like to be in, in the lives of these people. The world must just be so miserable. Speaking of miserable people, there's an audio, there's a voice note, an audio kind of recording of me being shared, where I'm criticizing the Deobandis. So I thought, okay, I've got to speak about this since it's viral on some groups. So basically, what this is there's some guy from Canada, I think. I can't even really remember his name, to be honest with you. Some miserable loser, whoever he is, right? Old guy, I think, old age, probably like maybe, I don't know, I can't remember, maybe approaching his 50s or something. But some guy who a few years back was very friendly. He'd kind of like got in touch with me on Facebook and supported some of my stuff, must have, for me to have been in touch with him. And then he discussed certain things with me through Facebook Messenger. And me, I have a habit, I send voice notes a lot of the time. So he obviously now becoming a passionate hater of mine. Some of these people, when they become haters, somebody commented on one of these things that they're hurting like an ex. And that is so true. They become obsessed with me. Man, I don't understand what I've done to these. I'm thinking, for God's sake. Whoa, it's a good thing it's a man. If it was a woman, then there would definitely be a scandal. So this guy, what he does is he gets my video, my audio, these kind of voice notes, pieces them together, and he shares them now. Recently, I think last week, they've been going around on clips. So this is probably a few years. This must be a few years old. So I think this is like from... Because I listened to the voice note and it spoke of an event in 2016. So it must be from 2016. Now, first of all, apart from the fact that I think whoever you are, like whoever these losers are, I think that's a very low blow anyway. That, you share things which are private conversation, but put that aside. Okay, fine. You want to share it, share it. But I think that in itself describes your character. That, that's a great character. Right. So the thing is, now, put that aside. In this audio clip, he's put my messages together. So I had a listen, and you can hear the interruptions. And you can hear him typing and I'm responding, and you can see that the clips kind of several clips put together, because the audio recordings only allow up to 60 seconds. So he's kind of like, he's had them all kind of patched together. And it's probably about 4 minutes long or something. But in it, I'm highly critical of the Deobandi kind of movement within the UK. And there's nothing, and these people are sharing this on all these WhatsApp groups. So I've had people send it to me, say, oh my God, I openly say this stuff. You're underestimating me. That ain't a scandal. If you want a scandal, come ask me if you're stuck on scandals. This ain't no scandal, for God's sake. Of course I think the Deobandi cult in the UK is a cult. Of course it is. Not every Deobandi is like that. I accept that. And many Deobandis I respect. But the movement as a whole in the UK is a cult. There's no two ways about it. I mean, it doesn't mean I don't like several people and I'm friends with them. I openly say that they're mafioso. So in this clip, I'm saying that they're mafioso. They kind of emotionally blackmail their followers, which they do with all this Hazratism and, oh, if you do this, this is it's going to be haram, or you're a kafir, or if you don't do taqleed, if you don't follow us like this is haram, you're going to go to hell, you're going to burn in hell over this. If a woman travels 48 months, she's going to burn in hell. If a woman cuts her hair, she's going to burn in hell. If all this nonsense that they go on about, nothing but utter nonsense. And when it comes to justifying their own statements of their akabir of Deoband, they bend over backwards and do like 10 backflips just to make sure their own imams are okay. You know, it's like I quoted last week Qasim Nanotwi Sahab saying that there can be another prophet after the prophet, but they'll defend that. They'll quote Rashid Ahmed Gangohi using disrespectful words towards the Prophet, but they'll justify that. But when it comes to 48 miles, a woman can't go. God forbid that they should show any leniency or any ease to make life easy for people. Nothing but utter control freak mentalities these people have got, insecure. And I'm being honest, I say this stuff openly. You know, these people are sharing this clip of mine as though I'm going to be like, oh. I say this openly. And I say on there that these people will not be the future of Islam in the West. And you can mark my words, people. I tell you, wallahi, I can swear by Allah, that what the teachings I'm giving you today about this deen being built on reason, in 2 generations to come, this will be the main understanding of Islam in the West. But you wallahi, mark my words. And history will be will bear testimony that I said it when it was unfashionable to do so. The difference, that's the only difference. I'm saying these things when it's unfashionable to do so. And history will bear testimony to that. Because this deen is built on reason. The cobwebs of Indo-Pak culture that these Deobandis and Brelvis have wrapped around this religion needs to be stripped off it. Otherwise Islam will fall, it will collapse. It will be decimated by atheism. Decimated. They can't, these Deobandis and Brelvis and people can't stand up to atheism. Wallahi, I say that you could get one, forget that. Somebody like just knowing the basic arguments like me, I could easily destroy their iman. Like that's how easy it is. Just some of these arguments, and this isn't a fraction of what atheists are showing on their websites and on YouTube. Then they say, why have 20% of young Muslims left the deen? I say this openly, there's no way in Britain that the future of Islam here lies with the schools like of the cults of Deoband. Never, ever. Yes, I believe that the Deoband school or cult will exist, will continue to exist. I don't think it will die down, but it will remain an isolated, very kind of pocket community. In the years to come, their own children and the children of their children will forget renouncing their cult, will renounce Islam. So I'm being very open about these things, and this doesn't just apply to Deobandis, it applies to anybody with this cultish mentality. This is going to go. It has no role in the future of Islam, especially in the West and especially in Britain. So that's me just being honest, okay? And look, the Tablighi Jamaat, somebody said, what about the... I'm not saying that none of these people haven't done great things. They've done great things. Even in that audio clip, I mentioned that, look, many of my ustads are Deobandis. I mentioned that I have love and respect for many of these people. I mentioned that they've done some great works. And I acknowledge, and I will credit where credit is due, they've done great things. But the harm they're now causing in the UK with this kind of this version of Islam that belongs to the colonial age, right? And India, colonial India, does not belong here. So it's making Muslims suffer. So that's what I'm kind of highlighting. And I mentioned on there about them being homophobic. Now, the background to that was, during that, when in 2016, I was on this particular WhatsApp group of Deobandi young graduate ulama up and down the country. Somebody added me. I hate these groups, but they added me. And I made the mistake of staying on for a while, because I only get annoyed with these groups. And they kind of put me on this group, and they started discussing these things on this group. All these kind of things. And somebody ended up discussing homosexuality. And these are all ulama, Maulanas, young Maulanas, obviously much younger than me. They're probably in their mid-20s. They're freshly graduated. And there must have been about 50 of them, or under 50, maybe about 40 to 50 on this group. Now, these people, the hatred that they were carrying. So somebody discussed about non-Muslims being homosexual. And these imams were saying things like, oh, the way you have to deal with them in Islam is we stand 10 feet or 2-3 meters away from homosexuals, and we do this and we do that. And I just said, look, listen, guys, look, I get the fact that this is haram in Islam. But why are you guys being overly, insecurely homophobic? What's this like, we have to stand 3 meters away from them? And you guys are imams and you're teaching this to Muslims. If that's their way of life, what Imam Malik said. Imam Malik said when he was asked about incest, if that's their way of life, that's their way of life. We leave them alone. If non-Muslims are homosexual, then homosexual. It's none of our business. You don't need to get so insecure about them being homosexual. You need to stand 3 meters away from them because this is what Islam teaches us. No, it doesn't. Islam doesn't teach you that. Why are you lying? Why you lie? This is the thing. That why are you lying? You guys, this is poor scholarship. Poor scholarship. So that was my comment when I mentioned in this voice note about them being very homophobic. So they got upset when I criticized them. Then I left the group. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. But I tell you people, seriously, this is the kind of bigotry that we find sometimes. And you know, hate is found amongst all people, but some of the worst kind of hate is found amongst people of religion. And it's unfortunate because the messenger of Allah came rahmatan lil alamin. And the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that I have been sent to perfect human character. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And yet we find, and this is in different communities as well. You'll see, I just saw this clip a few days ago about a Hindu festival going on in India. And you've got all these people outside a mosque because it's, I forgot which festival it was. It was a particular festival dedicated to Ram. And they had bricks and they were bricking a masjid. Hailing, yelling, like Shri Ram, Shri Ram. And they're yelling Shri Ram and they're kind of like stoning and bricking a masjid. It's like, what the hell is wrong with you people? Why do you have so much hatred? Like, I don't get, like, you see, this is what even in the name of Ram. Now, I'm sure Ram, by their own writing, by anybody's understanding, would have been a person of upstanding, he would have been a person of good character. He would never have been happy with this kind of behavior. You know, yelling Shri Ram, and stoning a masjid, bricking a masjid, throwing bricks at Muslims, and what is this? And Muslims, they know less. That when they come onto this, you know, this is no different. You know, this last week, check this out, people. I had, in my understanding, it was done by Muslims. They reached out to the Daily Mail. Check this out. The Daily Mail, a right-wing, bigoted, fascist, Islamophobic newspaper. They reached out to them to gun for me. Can you believe this? So I've seen that basically they, and this, my understanding was this was done by Muslims. That Muslims who took a disliking to me, they found out that there's 1 or 2 Sharia councils in the UK that take a liking to some of my rulings. That my rulings on saying things like that, condemning emotional abuse. Because I've said very clearly that if a woman is upset in a relationship, she has every right in Islam to leave that relationship. Whether the husband is happy or not, she has that right. And this is her right that Allah has given her. Nobody can take that from her. I have given that fatwa. I have given that ruling. Emotional blackmail is haram. I have given the ruling that if a person is upset in a relationship, right, man or woman, they have the right to leave it. Just because she's a woman, you can't hold her in religious marital captivity. You can't hold her. I've given this ruling. If a person took another wife, now there is this thing that somebody asked me as well, that look, in Islam, does the husband have to inform? Now generally there isn't an obligation, but if a person did have another wife, and I'm not too down with all these kind of like secret kind of marriages and stuff, but if a person, let's say it wasn't a secret marriage, let's say it was an open marriage, a person took another wife, the first wife has the right to say, I'm not happy, I'm leaving. She can apply for a talaq, and a talaq must be granted. I've given these rulings. I've given the rulings that it's haram to marry anybody underage, any child in Islam, it's haram. I've given these rulings. And 1 or 2 Sharia councils in the UK, alhamdulillah, have taken a liking to some of these rulings and have acted, have kind of incorporated these rulings. And I wish all of them, I wish not just these Sharia councils, these masjids, all Muslims incorporate this. But just because of this, my understanding is some Muslims they got the fact that, okay, because normally Sharia councils have such a bad reputation, and they basically tried to get the Daily Mail to come for me, that I'm influencing some Sharia councils, and Sharia councils are obviously notorious, and me, I've got a criminal past or whatever, and in the past I've been to prison or stuff like this. What the hell? Like, this is Muslims doing stuff like this. And I stand by my rulings. I say that forget Sharia councils, I want every masjid, every alim, every Muslim to adopt these rulings in condemning abuse. Muslims condemn domestic abuse, but they don't condemn the other kind of abuse. They don't condemn emotional blackmail or forcing women to, that are in unhappy relationships, holding on to them and stuff like this. They don't condemn that. And I wish they would, so I stand. But this was Muslims doing this. Can you see this? They would go to a paper that hates Muslims to kind of get a story on me. Like, it's like... This is the kind of bigoted, religious bigotry I'm talking about. It's amazing, subhanallah. So this kind of stuff, you get this stuff. But I mean, it's interesting. And these people, and some of these people who hate me so much, I don't even understand why. I don't even understand why, because at some point they were like, they must have been in contact with me. It's like that person sharing this voice note. There's a poem. वो आज हमसे मिले अनजानों की तरह हम यूं ही राह तके बैठे थे दीवानों की तरह that they meet me today like a stranger and I have been sitting watching their path हर निगाह में और दूर चले जाते हैं वो हमसे नजरें चुराते हैं बेईमानों की तरह This is the kind of stories that we get. Let's take some other questions, people. Let's take some other questions. What's going on? Oh, Doc Imran is in the house, people. Doc Ustad. I refer to him as Ustad, but Doc Imran Khan, who runs Metroflex gym in Birmingham. I'd like to, since I've just seen Doc, I'd like to, anybody, by the way, that needs gym tips, that's your man right there. Get in touch with him, with Metroflex. But I'd like to actually say that I had a very, an awesome kind of sit down with Doc, discuss certain things. One interesting thing I'd like to also share is this thing on hijama. It's very interesting because I've been asked in the past about hijama, bloodletting and stuff like this, and I've felt that, look, this is, as Ibn Khaldun and these great scholars in the past have said, this is not a sunnah, it was just a practice at the time of the Prophet, of the Arabs. What is interesting is Doc has, with his medical background, has conducted research into the kind of blood that has been extracted, several samples, a substantial study sample, and had that kind of analyzed and evaluated for toxicity, and seen that there is really no kind of higher level of toxins as opposed to normal blood. And so it's interesting, and that these things, they've become a bit of a culture now, this whole thing of hijama and stuff like this. And I'm not, if people want to do that, I'm not condemning it. Maybe there's some, I don't know, maybe there may be some benefits or something, but generally it doesn't remove toxins and stuff like this, and it's not sunnah in my understanding. 48 the sample study was 48 samples, people, that were analyzed, and I believe that Doc has got a paper on that as well, so you can reach out to Doc and he'll probably share that, inshallah, with you guys. But that was awesome. And I think another interesting thing that's worth mentioning is Doc, you see, during our discussion he mentioned something very it was an interesting point, and I want to kind of share that. You see, he said that, look, when you mention, let's say, minority positions, like I mentioned minority positions on certain things, he said that that's because he's got a background in the social sciences, in medicine, and things like this. He said, well, that's like in academia when people will mention let's say, a study, and will say, but there's a minority report that states this. So you're doing what is pretty much the same there, but in academia people know not to follow a minority report. So this is, so he asked, so why wouldn't you see that equally kind of mirrored in religion? So I thought that was a very good question, because that's and it's worth discussing, and that's, in the social sciences I would totally agree, because studies are based on objectivity. So studies are based on things like, blind studies. You've got the kind of the study sample, confounding variables. How was this study impacted? Was it, one-tailed, two-tailed? Things like this. A lot of things are taken into consideration when you're looking at studies. Now, it could be that you've got a minority report, but when you look at the study sample behind it, it was weak and stuff like this, right? So you would say, oh, well, that study sample was only 4 people, and this was based on 400 people. So naturally, that's weak. But that's in science. In religion, it doesn't work like that, because in religion, most things are not based on objectivity, unfortunately. There is a bit of objectivity in there, but it's based on things like power positions, sectarianism. It's based on getting control, on claiming this to be that you are carrying out the work of God. You see, it's not to do with that kind of, people of religion claim things. They don't claim they do. They say, God, I am carrying out the work of God here. So it's not the same as the social sciences, or as when you're looking at minority reports. Here, in religion, how something became minority majority is not based on the study sample, or whether it was qualitative or quantitative data, or whether it was a double-blind experiment, or whether it was one-tailed or two-tailed, or the confounding elements. It's based on how it got a democratic following. How did more people end up following this? And that is usually to do with power positions. People, they got in positions of power. They influenced things, usually through politics or through other kind of power positions of social structure. It's not to do with the evidence. So, for example, the Hanafi madhab spread, not because people said, I know the Hanafi madhab is so strong, and this isn't an attack on the Hanafi madhab, but I'm just being honest. It spread simply because Abu Yusuf became the supreme judge of the Muslim world and appointed Hanafi judges everywhere. So people just became Hanafi. Prior to him taking up that position, Abu Hanifa was actually, in fact, I'll read out to you, check this out, people. I'll read out to you a quote which will shock you. Right, that this is an interesting quote, and it will show you actually what I'm talking about. Check this out. I was coming across this the other day. Somebody sent it to me. It was really interesting. Speaking about Ijma. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawud al-Sijistani, Abu Dawud's son, Abu Bakr, great scholar, يقول لأصحابه ما تقولون في مسألة اتفق عليها مالك وأصحابه والشافعي وأصحابه والأوزاعي وأصحابه والحسن بن صالح وأصحابه وسفيان الثوري وأصحابه وأحمد بن حنبل وأصحابه. He said to his students, what would you say about an issue in which Malik and his companions agreed upon, Shafi'i and his companions all agreed upon, Awza'i and all his companions agreed upon, Sufyan al-Thawri and all his companions agreed upon, Hassan ibn Salih and all his companions agreed upon, Ahmad ibn Hanbal and all his companions agreed upon. So they said, Ya Abu Bakr, la takunu mas'ala asahhu min hadhihi. They said, Abu Bakr, he was a great muhaddith, there is no mas'ala more sound than that. And check what he said this is. He said, فَقَالَ هَؤُلَاءِ كُلُّهُمْ. He said, all of these have said, اتفقوا, they agreed, على تضليل أبي حنيفة, upon the misguidance of Abu Hanifa. Now look at that. Look at that. Check this out. Ibn al-Jarud, Ibn Abdul Barr brings this in his book about Abu Hanifa, al-Intiqa. Ibn al-Jarud, who was a great scholar, leaning into a Shafi'i thought, and a great muhaddith, wrote in his book al-Du'afa wal-Matrukin, those who are rejected narrators. He said, An-Nu'man ibn Thabit, Abu Hanifa, and he's from the rejected and weak transmitters. Nu'man ibn Thabit, Abu Hanifa. Check this out. Jullu hadithihi waham. The majority of his hadith is just an illusion. And then he said, وَقَدْ اخْتُلِفَ فِي إِسْلَامِهِ. Oh my God. He said there's a disagreement about his Islam, whether his Islam is valid or not. Now, check that out. That's some quotes about Imam Abu Hanifa. In his time, he was deemed an absolute deviant by people. Imam Malik, although had respect for him, but considered his ways unacceptable. All the scholars considered his ways unacceptable. Now, because he happened to live in Iraq, where the capital city was, where the Muslim Caliphate was, the caliphs ask him to become the Imam, the supreme judge. He refuses. But because his student becomes the supreme judge of the Muslim world, the Qadi al-Qudat, he refuses to appoint any judges anywhere unless they're Hanafi. All of a sudden, the Hanafi madhab becomes acceptable, and it becomes the most powerful madhab. Now you tell me, is that based on studies? Is that based on evidences? Is that based on objectivity, or is it based on power positions? It's based on power positions. So this is how, you see, in fact, there's an interesting study into how Iran, about 300 years ago, became Shia. Because Iran, if you go look at the history of Iran or Persia, let's say, 400, 500 years ago and going backwards, it was not Shia. It was actually Sunni, heavily Shafi'i. How does it become suddenly Shia? So it's interesting. And it becomes suddenly Shia just through politics because of the Shah and so on, converting and having his beef with the other rulers and so on. So in religion, things are seldom based on pure objectivity. They're usually based on power positions. So that's the kind of thing. But yeah, I thought that's definitely worth mentioning. But it was an interesting and amazing conversation. And I think I'd like to say that, look, the reason I also made an article sharing Doc Imran's article, his Facebook status, and by the way, he got a lot of slack for making a Facebook post about me. And people said to him that, oh, how can you? And somebody said on there that, do you know Mufti Layth has got a degree in psychology, so he's manipulating you psychologically to kind of, he's using you to his advantage. People give me so much credit. I wish I was a fraction of what people make me out to be. But yeah, but one thing I did want to say is that the reason I think it was really interesting, especially speaking to people like Doc, and Doc especially, is because he had such a different position from me. And yet you can sit and talk with respect, and you can enjoy each other's company and walk away thinking, you know what, that was a solid kind of sitting, even though we disagree on so many things. And this is the kind of adab that we need to return to. So, and that is really the messenger of Allah that Allah is speaking of when he says, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Indeed, you are upon greatness when it comes to characteristics. Cool, people, let's move on. Some questions. Right, I had been asked, about a hadith of Khuzaima ibn Thabit radiyallahu an. Now there is a hadith of Khuzaima. I do not believe this incident to be true. This is a hadith of a Sahabi who it's basically where the Prophet is saying that Khuzaima's testimony is worth 2. Now it's interesting. Now I need you to take a deep breath, because it's not. Now I'm going to tell you where this hadith comes and what is the issue and which ones are acceptable. Now this hadith does come in Bukhari, and it comes in the Musnad of Ahmad as well, in 2 places. It is transmitted by Ibn Shihab Zuhri. Most of these narrations all come through Ibn Shihab Zuhri anyway. Right, now there's 2 narrations that come in Bukhari that speak of Zayd ibn Thabit saying that saying that I was looking for a verse in the Quran. This is after the Prophet had passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to compile the Quran during the time of Abu Bakr radiyallahu an, and there was a verse that that I knew, but nobody seemed to have had it documented, and I found it with Khuzaima ibn Thabit, and I remember the Prophet saying that his testimony is worth 2. Now this hadith is fine. I don't have a problem with this hadith. This hadith is fine. In this understanding, it's not that, you see, the transmission of the Quran is Mutawatir. It's not that nobody knew that verse anyway. The condition was that it needed to be known and documented by more than one person. Now Zayd ibn Thabit himself, or this Sahabi, in case it was Ibn Haritha, But just in I recall it to be Zayd ibn Thabit, but in case it was Ibn Haritha. But this Sahabi himself had it documented, and here he finds it documented with Ibn Khuzaima. Khuzaima ibn Thabit al-Ansari radiyallahu an. That's fine. As to the Prophet saying, look, he's a man whose testimony is worth 2 testimonies, this is just praise. This is fine, it's just praise. It's like somebody saying that here is a man whose strength is that of 2 men, or his intellect is that of a whole crowd, or it's the Prophet praising him for his character. It does not mean that Khuzaima ibn Thabit radiallahu an, wherever he goes, he will equate to 2 people in testifying. As to why did the Prophet say that, my understanding is we do not know why the Prophet said that. He must have said it at some point just out of praising him. As to the narrations that we've got, they are weak and unacceptable. Because in my understanding, they disrespect and dishonor the Prophet. Because let me show you the narrations that we have. First of all, there's one narration in the Musnad of Ahmad, which is utterly unacceptable. Everybody accepts that's just weak. Ibn Shihab Zuhri is saying it once again. Umarat ibn Khuzaima, this is the son of Khuzaima, is transmitting it from his uncle, from Khuzaima's brother, who we're not too sure who his uncle is. People say his name is also Umara, but we don't know too much. But people say, oh, he's also from the Sahaba. Okay, so it's interesting. Now, there's this hadith that he had a dream. Khuzaima ibn Thabit had a dream that he is prostrating on the forehead of the Prophet. He wakes up, he goes to the Prophet, he tells the Prophet, this is in the Musnad of Ahmad, that I had a dream where I was prostrating on your forehead. So the Prophet then lies down and he prostrates on the forehead of the Prophet. That is absurd and is utterly unacceptable and it's weak. Out the window that goes immediately. Then there's a famous popular incident which is transmitted in books like it is in Abu Dawood, I believe it is in Nasa'i, and maybe, but generally in these books, Abu Dawood is in Nasa'i, I think, maybe, yeah, so that's the main ones. In this hadith, the Prophet has bought either a camel in some variations or a horse from a Bedouin. And the Prophet buys this and then walks off. And when he walks off, the Bedouin is slow behind him, and people come to the Bedouin and say, hey, listen, why did you sell it to him? Sell it to us and we will pay you more. And so the Bedouin says, okay. So he says to the Prophet, I didn't sell that to you yet. And the Prophet says, yes, you did. And he says, okay, bring me a witness. So the Prophet says, who will bear testimony? Who will be a witness for me? So Khuzaima says, I bear witness, Ya Rasulullah. I bear witness that you bought this from him. So the Prophet says to him, how can you bear witness? Because you weren't even there. So he responds by saying, well, the fact that I accept you're a prophet is enough for me to know that you're telling the truth. So then the Prophet says in this story that, oh, in that case, you can be equivalent to 2 people. This, in my understanding, is utterly unacceptable, that the Prophet would stand a man as a witness who did not witness something. Just because what is the purpose of him being a witness? Is that he witnessed it, not that he believed. Otherwise, all the Muslims testified that the Prophet was the Prophet of God. How could the Prophet go against the Quran in having a shahidai? The way Allah says that you must have a shahada bil qist, that it must be just, wa i'dilu walau ala anfusikum, that you must be just in testimony. You can't have to say that, well, oh, you're a witness just because you accept me as the Prophet. this is, to me, this is kind of blasphemous. I don't mean that this is blasphemous in that sense, but it's, to me, blasphemous, and it's disregarding the entire teachings of the Quran and the life of the Prophet. Why would the Prophet, that's a false witness. Why would the Prophet have a false witness? Because Khuzaima in the Hadith says, the Prophet says, how can you be a witness? You never even saw this. And he says, yeah, but because I know you're a truthful person, so I'm just going to say, so I believe you. And the Prophet then not only accepts that, he says, I tell you what, you can be in the place of two. That is not the character of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that hadith is utterly unacceptable. This does come, by the way, it is transmitted. They all come through, generally through Zuhri. This is transmitted in Abu Dawood from Abu Yaman, al-Hakam ibn Nafi', right, who transmits this from Shu'aib. Now, Abu Zur'a highlights, Abu Zur'a al-Razi, who I've mentioned earlier on in his Ilal book, he highlights that لم يسمع من شعيب إلا حديثا واحدا. Apart from one hadith, Abu Yaman never heard anything from Shu'aib in this chain. And so this is, and even Ibn Hajar in his Taqrib mentions that the majority of all the hadith of Abu Yaman from Shu'aib are munawala, meaning he just found them in a book and he took them. So this is utterly unacceptable. There is another chain in An-Nasa'i which is transmitted from, it's from Haytham ibn Marwan, from Muhammad ibn Bakar, and both of these people have issues with them. Okay. And then there's another chain in Abu Dawood, once again with the same narrators going from Abu Yaman through Shu'aib, and Abu Yaman didn't even hear from Shu'aib. So, and these generally are transmitted from Ibn Shihab Zuhri as well. So this incident is unacceptable, that the Messenger of Allah would ever do something like that. Okay, so just to kind of clarify. So yes, there's a point to this, that this hadith, this story is popular, so I thought I'll just clarify that. Right, let's take some questions, people, some questions. Then we'll try to wrap this up. Right, I'd been asked a question on relationships. Okay, an interesting one. And that is... okay, somebody's quickly asking about hell. Does hell have to be eternal? And does Allah have to send people to hell? Look, what... And somebody else is asking, what do I think of Sheikh Samir al-Nas? Is this to do with the fact that he's going to do a talk on the second coming of Jesus? Which I will, inshallah, watch and include in my refutation. Right, so... where am I from? Am I from Liverpool? Come on, man. Does this accent sound like the Liverpool accent? I'm from Bromtown, Birmingham, Central. This is centre, the heart of England, people, the heart of England. Now, right, I'd been asked a question about relationships. God, sore throat, man. Relationships, and somebody has asked that, look, they found a suitor which is, let's say, appropriate, or who they like. So this girl has found somebody who she likes, so she likes this guy, but he doesn't really pray. Is that an issue? Should she turn that down for somebody who does pray? Right, and we've just got Indra tuning in there all the way from Indonesia. By the way, I've had some messages from Indonesia. All the people tuning in there, much love to all of you. Shukran, barakallahu feekum wa hayyakum. Right, so just thought I'd give a random shout out there. But look, this question of relationships. If you found a spouse, but he doesn't pray or she doesn't pray, should this be a deal breaker? Now, that's interesting because look, I don't know. I think this depends because it's what does it mean to be religious? That's the question, you see. Because in the Hadith, when the Prophet said people are married for beauty and wealth and status and so on, but be victorious with the one of deen. You see, deen in that day and age meant deen with character as well. It meant having like this human character to you. Today, it doesn't mean that. So I'm not sure what people mean when they say religious. If somebody's religious, because if religious means religion is important in your life, as in it plays an important role in your life. Because I could take myself as an example. To many people, I'm definitely not religious to many people. Depends on your understanding of religion. You see, to me, if I take the understanding that religion plays a huge role in my life, then I'm deeply religious. Islam plays a massive role in my life. But how it plays a role is very different. In my life, it plays a role in its teachings, in the curiosity it arouses in me, in the guidance, in the wisdom it bestows, in its kind of infinite search, perpetual search it sends me on, in the kind of way that it adapts to all times and places. This is how Islam kind of totally overwhelms me. So yes, in that sense, I would consider myself to be very deeply religious, if that's what being religious means. If being religious means you're always praying or you're worshipping a lot and stuff like this, then I doubt I will be from that category of being seen as very religious. Or you are you love ceremonies and ritual religion, and so it depends what religious means to people. So I would say that, look, it depends on what if that is important to you, what that person is. To me as a person personally, being a good human being, yes, look, I'm a Muslim, so if I was to marry somebody, them being a Muslim would be very important to me, and that's the same with most Muslims everywhere, and that's understandable. Do they have to be praying? Now, praying is important to me, that they pray their daily prayers, but to me, that they are a decent human being would probably weigh heavier than just the fact that they have rituals but then are very kind of arrogant or something, or that they don't have good character. So to me, character would overweigh certain things, although the fact that they pray is very important. But for example, you get people who pray but they're kind of weird, they're cultish. I can't stand people like that. I mean, I couldn't personally stand somebody that would want to tell me about praying and tell me about doing stuff like this. So I don't know. This is a personal question that each person has to answer. So I would say that, look, I don't feel personally that it has to be a deal breaker. I would say that I don't think you are sinful in any way for choosing somebody that doesn't pray. I don't think so. As long as they're a decent human being. But I'm not saying you need to choose that person. It's entirely up to you who you choose, okay? They should click. There should be some, obviously, shared values. There should be some understanding. And everybody's different. So that's my advice on people who are seeking kind of suitable suitors. That how should they be? Should they be into what I'm into? And sometimes they don't need to be totally into what you're into, because that's just does your head. And religion, once again, it's different to all people. To me, religion is a very private affair. I don't instruct people around me to pray, for example. I don't. Like people, I would never instruct my wife or instruct somebody, say, oh, you haven't prayed Dhuhr, get up and pray Dhuhr. I would never do that. I wouldn't even, I mean, it's just, that's the kind of person I am. Because I believe that if I tell somebody to pray, imagine in their heart they get this kind of feeling that, well, I was going to, but now why should I do it? Because you told me to. And because of that, they choose not to pray. And I get the fact that, look, in the Quran, there is the verse addressing the Prophet. وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا. Command your family. But that's to the Prophet, because he would have done it in the best of ways. Me, if I tell somebody to pray, I'll probably just annoy them. So I ain't going to do that. So that's me. So I think this is, it's up to each person how they choose to, but I don't think you need to feel guilty. At the same time, I do think Islamic values are important. If they're important to you, they should be some shared kind of values. They should be, that prayer should be important. But if a person prays 5 times a day, if they, let's say they're missing their prayers, or they're struggling with that, or I don't know, I mean, it's your call. So that's what I would say. Cool, people. Any other, let's take some. Somebody's asking about, somebody's just insulting the companion Muawiyah radiallahu an. And look, I've said before, I do have immense respect and love for Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu an, who was one of the great companions as far as my understanding, and that's what Imam Malik said as well. I understand he disagreed with other companions. It doesn't detract from the other companions. Please don't come on my page and insult them, because obviously to me that will be offensive. Okay, so I will block you. There is no two ways about that. Okay, so I've been asked another question, by the way, on somebody's asking about the timings for Ramadan. I've got a whole series on YouTube called Fast and Fiqhious, short clips, maybe about 5 minutes each approximately, where I'm dealing with a lot of questions, and I speak about this over there. So the thing is that, right, somebody's asking so many questions. I'm just trying to I lose my somebody just criticized again about Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. Look, Muawiyah radiallahu anhu wasn't a god. I've never said he was a god, and I've never said he hasn't made mistakes. He probably did make mistakes, just like every other companion made mistakes. I mean, but what I don't like is, I've said before, this one-sided. You see, if you want to be critical, then you got to be critical of everybody, or you just let it go. That's my point. What I don't like is just criticize Muawiyah, and the others, we're never allowed to criticize them then. So that's my... So I don't want to really talk about that, to be honest with you. Look, I've got a whole video on YouTube, and I just want to leave that where it is. I don't want to really get into all of that. In my understanding, I do respect I respect all these companions. So at least have the decency and respect on my wall to respect me for that. What you believe is in your heart. Okay. Somebody, the famous hadith about every innovation in the Hellfire. Yes, I believe that every innovation in the Hellfire means that every innovation is of no real avail. That means it's just really, it's useless. That's what it really means. So in my understanding, that's, I mean, that part of the hadith has been critiqued anyway. But I mean, this thing of every is a misguidance, meaning it turns you away from what was the pristine understanding of the deen. Right. Why would you think I'm... Alright, so I want to touch up on this Rada'ul Kabir. I've been asked, Rada'atul Kabir, that can you nurse? Okay, can... Rada'a is when a woman breastfeeds a child. That child then becomes her kind of foster child in Islam. There are certain rulings. So if a woman nurses or breastfeeds a child under the age of 2 within Islam, that child takes on the rulings as though there's a kind of surrogate mother ruling that is applied. So this woman takes like motherly rulings towards that child. So she could never marry this child. That child could never marry her daughter. Stuff like that. If it's a boy or if it's a girl, she could never marry her son and things like this because they would become siblings. And so there's a lot of these rulings. This is called Rada'a. There's nothing. I mean, that's a well-known ruling in Islam. Now, there is a hadith of Sahla al-Amiriya who, right now, who is the wife of Abu Hanifa. Now, she, in this particular hadith, she approaches somebody approaches the Prophet and they say, well, look, we used to live in a place and we've got a servant, a slave by the name of Salim, who is the Mawla of Hudhayfa. Sorry, this is Hudhayfa. Did I say Abu Hudhayfa? Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman. Now, this is Salim is the Mawla, the slave of Hudhayfa. Now, they say, look, we've got tight space and he's not really... He was like an adopted son. But now we've realized in Islam, adoption doesn't carry the same ruling. So he's not a real son. We used to treat this person as though he was an actual son. And now we've realized he isn't. So do I have to wear hijab and do all these things in front of him? And our place is so tight and I don't really, you know... so in this particular hadith, apparently the Prophet then tells her that she can nurse him 5 sucklings, and he will become like a son to you. But he's a grown man in this narration. Now, the interesting thing is that this is transmitted. Imam Malik brings this transmission from Ibn Shihab Zuhri, who then claims that he heard Urwa transmit this hadith. And then they go on to say, it's a lengthy description of this entire hadith, saying that this was what Aisha radiallahu anha used to believe. So it was her madhab. And none of the other companions ever accepted this, and Ali radiallahu an, and Umar, and Abu Bakr, and all these other people rejected this understanding. And all the wives of the Prophet, they said that that's not, you can't do things like that. Okay. So this, now Imam Malik brings this. In my understanding, Imam Malik, because when he's asked about this ruling, Imam Malik condemns this ruling and says in his fiqh that Rada'atul Kabir is nonsense, that you cannot feed a grown-up like this. Okay, and he does not become your mahram, he doesn't become your... So based on this, for example, ruling, let's say a person drank... Sorry guys if this is going to gross people out, but let's say his own wife was lactating and he ended up drinking some of that milk. She would become his mom. Which is nonsense, because in the Maliki madhab, a person can drink that milk. I mean, the milk isn't haram if you... if a person, I'm just saying, got a bit adventurous. So the thing is that Imam Malik has clearly said that this is not haram, and he brings that in the Muwatta as well to show that that's not haram. So when Imam Malik brings this was to show, in my understanding, that Ibn Shihab Zuhri has transmitted this, but we don't believe this to be sound. This is why Malik presented that in the Muwatta. And because, why do I say this? People then said that this is the understanding of Aisha. This is the madhab of Aisha. Yet people, in Sahih al-Bukhari, in Sahih Muslim, from the same chain, from Urwa, from Aisha, is the hadith that the Prophet is teaching them, and Aisha is transmitting that al-rada'a min al-maja'a. That rada'a only works, innama al-rada'a min al-maja'a, that you can only feed, and the rulings apply in an age of nourishment, whilst the child is so young. Now, meaning 2 or under, in that kind of suckling age. So this is transmitted by Aisha. So why would Aisha be transmitting this hadith herself and then going against it? But rather, in my understanding, that was circulated about Aisha, but it was not true. And Imam Malik only brought the transmission of Ibn Shihab Zuhri because he says, oh, wa akhbar, and from what I have been told, and he goes on to say this, that Zuhri had said this, and this is why another companion by the name of Ibn Abi Mulaika, who transmits this, says, I spent a year in Medina. I knew this, but I was so fearful to transmit it, because people would be like, I was so fearful that what the hell, it sounded absurd. So that goes to show, and this is why Ibn Abdul Barr says in his Istidhkar, that this showed that people, even if you do accept this, that people from long ago had rejected this. So that's, in my understanding, that that incident is not a true incident. It's a misconstrued event. Okay. Rada'atul kabir does not make any sense. And the apparent reading of the hadith does seem to imply that she's actually feeding the man from her breast. That's the apparent reading, which is absurd. And then Ibn Abdul Barr says that, but nobody would accept that. They would think that she would pour that into something and then feed him. But the reading says 5 sucklings. Khamsa rada'at. So what would 5? It doesn't make any sense. And then today, some scholars, some Salafi scholars have taken this ruling to be true, and they've said that if a woman wants a man to become a mahram, she can get she can get lactating milk or from herself or from her sisters or somebody that is immediately related to her, and feed it to this man, and the man can then now come and go as he pleases. This is makri, this one. This one makri of the deen, I tell you. That's nonsense, people. That's absurd. That's a mockery of this religion, I'm telling you. And some people in Egypt tried to give a fatwa saying if you work with people, then why not just breastfeed them? Or they're saying, okay, you can do it through a glass. Hey, it's that latte. Gives a whole new meaning to chai latte, I tell you. So this is nonsense. But yeah, and in the Hanafi madhab, my understanding is that is haram to drink that milk anyway. In the Maliki madhab, it isn't haram to drink that milk. But I mean, in the Hanafi madhab, it is haram. But this hadith is not true. This is a misconstrued or misattributed event. Okay, of this rada'atul kabir. Okay, you can't kind of go around feeding grown men lactating milk and just in the hope that they now all of a sudden are like your brothers. You gotta be joking. People are twisted. You can't be doing stuff like that. That will totally that will get people totally going the wrong way. Can you imagine? You're doing that with some kind of intention that now you can never think of me sexually. And that's like, that'll be like the first thing people are totally twisted. Can you imagine that they'll be like, whoa, that's a definite signal. Like men can definitely, we can't read women's signals anyway. Men think every signal from a woman is always a signal anyway. So that's just how men are wired. So when a woman just looks, people are like, that's a signal. So can you imagine this as, talk about mixed messages? Because women will be like all saying nice things to guys, and then they'll be like, that's mixed messages. I was never flirting with you. I never meant it like, I just only thought of you as a friend. So guys are always confused as hell anyway. And now a woman says, hey, have some of my breast milk. That's like mixed messages on steroids. People are like, yeah, so, yeah. I mean, the last thing they're thinking is, oh, now I definitely can't think of you sexually. That's like, that thought said no man ever. So you can get that out. So the Salafis who have given that fatwa, seriously, you guys need to check, revisit, please, revisit. Because that stuff just ain't happening. God, and then people, I'll tell you what, let's take some rapid round questions and then we'll call this to an end. What's with the pack weddings and putting a Quran on top of the bride's head? There you go. Paki customs, just customs. God knows. I suppose they think it brings them some kind of good luck, I guess. Big me up now. Is that? People, Blindy is in the house. Blindy, who's got his name in Chinese there. Obviously, Saj, my Cody, my mate since we were 5 years old. Since we're 5 years old, people. Right, so let's take some rapid round questions. Why not over the groom's head? Because the groom is already blessed by God, obviously. It's the woman that needs... Okay, let's take some quick rapid round questions and we'll call this, can you please wear the glasses before the... Of course I can. What kind of a question is that? The milk. Protein. Protein, people, protein. You know the old saying, waste not, want not. So what are some questions? What is your view on what? What is your view? Do you consider returning after? Do you consider the hadith about a rightly guided caliphate? Watch my clip on caliphate. I've already answered that along with Sheikh Akram Nadwi. So I don't believe that Islam was sent about politics. I believe that those things were just coincidental. But you can watch that there. Sheikh Akram Nadwi goes into a better explanation and I mention it as well. Can the Prophet be depicted in film? You see, I would advise against things like that because I think it's just going to cause so much negativity that I wouldn't advise to depict the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Thoughts on Malala's return visit to Pakistan? Why not? That's a future Prime Minister, I'm telling you. Malala is definitely going to be the future Prime Minister. Does heaven physically exist? I've got no... When you say physically, you see, the thing is, we don't know what is reality. It exists. How does it exist? What is it like? How does it feel? What does it look like? I don't know what it looks like. I don't know. We've got descriptions in the Quran which really are just there as a frame of reference. They're not really what heaven is like, because the Prophet said nobody can conceive what heaven is like. So we don't know what it's actually like in that sense. Do you agree with the statement, whatever harms you is haram? That depends, because you know, fatty foods can harm you, but they're not haram. Smoking harms you. I don't think smoking is haram. Marijuana harms you. Damn, I need to stop this reasoning. Scandals Are tattoos haram? I don't think tattoos are haram. I think they're discouraged. But I don't think they're haram. Just because it's harmful. People of the opposite gender can be harmful. You know, there's a poem of Mir I was going across where he speaks to himself, where he says, In aina ruiyon ke kya Mir bhi ashik hain? He says, you know, these beautiful women, these mirror-like faced women, is Mir too, like addressing himself, have you too become besotted by them? Says, in aina ruiyon ke kya Mir bhi ashik hain? Jab ghar se nikalte hain, हैरान निकलते हैं. That whenever he leaves home, jab ghar se nikalte hain, हैरान निकलते हैं. That whenever he leaves home, he's always confused. This is it's an interesting poem of Mir, because in the same kind of poem, he has the line that mat sahal hame jano, that don't think we are simple, phirte hain falak barson, that for time, it has taken time so long, tab khak ke parde se insan nikalte hain. That after such ages and generations, not generations, millennia, does insan appear from dust. Many people have said perhaps he was speaking about evolution and things like that here, which is interesting. And it's in line with that he says, in aina ruiyon ke kya Mir bhi ashik hain, and jab ghar se nikalte hain, हैरान निकलते हैं. That whenever he leaves home, he's always in a state of shock. But yeah, so right, so what's going on, people? What's going on? I think we got to wrap this up. Any interesting things? Indra ji, shukran, barakallahu fikum. So that's some of the, I think we've covered up everything. Right, there was an article going around, by the way, constantly going on about saying, oh, Mufti Abu Layth or Abu Layth. They don't want to call me Mufti. Abu Layth. Right, Abu Layth. Basically, they're really upset about me having a dig at Maulvi Yasir at Deobandi last week. And Makari, what to do, huh? Makari. So there's these articles that have come out saying, going on about this verse that where I said, about Jesus, kana fil mahdi sabiya, he was a child. So they're saying, look, he quotes al-Alusi and he leaves out these points what al-Alusi says, and al-Alusi is not trying to prove this point. And al-Alusi, and I mentioned on last week's show, look, al-Alusi begins by saying there's a problem in this verse because it's past tense. Then he tries to answer, and they say, no, but al-Alusi is not saying this, al-Alusi is not saying this, al-Alusi. Abe yaar, I don't care. I couldn't care less. Keep al-Alusi. I only mentioned him once. I've got a whole prelude video. Forget al-Alusi. Allah is saying it in the Quran. Kana is past tense. Whatever you understand, you're saying this kana is extra. Allah's just added something extra. Fine. That's your understanding. I'm going with what Allah actually said, with the actual reading of the Quran. You can go with an interpretation. I'm going with the actual reading of the Quran. You're saying al-Alusi. Yaar, rakh lo al-Alusi ko yaar. I never wanted al-Alusi in the first place. He's a Hanafi scholar of a later... I just mentioned once that, look, even he problematized this. And this is what they've just caught on to, and they just want constantly writing articles about this. Forget that, I've got a whole prelude video. Watch my prelude and disprove me. Refute my prelude. Forget this al-Alusi. I couldn't care less. I said it clearly. Allah and His Messenger. Allah and His Messenger. That's what I've asked for. And reason. Allah, His Messenger and reason. I couldn't care less what al-Alusi said. Yes, I quoted him on one thing. If you feel he didn't say that, fine, keep him. Doesn't bother me. I think you've totally misread me. So, right, I've got a prelude video, prelude meaning an intro, to why the second coming of Jesus is problematic. It's on YouTube. You can search it as prelude, my name, Mufti Abu Layth, it'll come up. You can watch it and refute that video, refute my arguments. Forget about this one al-Alusi. What a red herring to just attach yourselves to. And the other thing, do be warned, people. Constantly obsessing over me. It only furthers my cause, I tell you. Right, so what are we? Any final wrap-ups, people? Any final wrap-ups? What's going on? We're going to do the course, inshallah, perhaps in about 2 weeks' time, I'm planning, on the Jesus thing, and then it will be out. Just a shout out, look at that. Mawish, shout out, stay blessed. What are your views on Tablighi Jamaat? Good views. I mean, I think good of them. I know they've had a lot of politics recently, but that's them. Do saints exist? Depends on your meaning of saints. Can you give a fatwa on wudu? Incontinence. If a person has incontinence, they don't need to do wudu. I mean, they can just keep the wudu they've got. It doesn't break with that. Bitcoin, I've answered previously. All these things are permissible. In Islam, everything is permissible by default unless proven otherwise. I think it's time to wrap this up. What do you think about the Punish the Muslim Day? I think that's disgusting. And I did admire the campaign that Muslims began that love a Muslim Day, and I think there's been some very positive campaigns where people in certain parts of the UK are giving out roses to non-Muslims. And you know, the best thing is going to be our character, people. I think people should be vigilant, but I don't think it's that threatening as people are making it out as well. I don't think so, Allahu A'lam. But I think you should be vigilant, but I don't think you need to panic, go into panic mode or anything. That's my understanding. Right. Keith is shouting for a shout out. Come on, get real, man. Stop hiding behind these fake profiles. Use a real name. Right. So, people, with that, I think we've covered pretty much most things. I didn't get to go into, oh my God, I wanted to cover the hadith on women traveling abroad. What I'll do is I'll cover that next week. Apologies for not covering that. Just all these things, being so distracted. Saying Bismillah in the toilet. Yes, you can say Bismillah in the toilet. Imam Malik mentioned that you can do dhikr in the toilet. I think it's time to go to sleep. Shahid, Ustad, Shahid Batji, Ahlan wa Sahlan. People, there you go. Ustad Shahid Butt in the house from Bromtown, right? Inshallah, doing some grassroots work. Right, people, inshallah, take very good care of yourselves. I'm going to wrap this up, inshallah. Till next week. If you got any questions, reach out to me. Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter. It's Mufti Abu Layth, Malm 2014 on Snapchat. I do try to respond to questions. And inshallah, take very good care of yourselves. Till then, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.